Hello and welcome to Palace Confidential, your weekly look at all things royal, brought to you from The Mail. I'm Jo Elvin, and coming up we will discuss eggs for the King, tears for Prince Andrew, Harry's secret Africa plan, and lots more, including your comments and questions. Joining me to discuss all that and more is Kate Mansey, assistant editor of The Mail on Sunday, and Richard Eden, the Daily Mail's diary editor. Welcome to you both. As usual, you can check the links below for more about what we've discussed, what we wore, and how you can sign up to Richard's newsletter if you haven't already, although I know all the Edenites already have. Now, since becoming king, Charles has received a very warm reception wherever he has been, but that run ended yesterday when a protester threw eggs at him during a trip to the north of England. Kate, what on earth? What can you tell us?
Well, it was your kind of normal walkabout. Charles and the Queen Consort were meeting members of the public, and then all of a sudden there was sort of shout and had eggs flinging towards them. They didn't hit the King or the Queen Consort, but it was definitely a bit of a scuffle. The security kind of launched in, got this chap. It's just one bloke who decided that he was going to throw some eggs, and then the police swept in and promptly arrested him. I think we've since learned that he was an Extinction Rebellion campaigner or activist, which seems rather unfair given everything that King Charles has done over his lifetime to raise awareness of climate change and things like that. It seems perhaps the wrong target. But we've seen things like this in the past, haven't we? I think you know, members of the royal family have come on to, you know, just more recently we had shouts at Prince Andrew when he was walking behind the coffin for his mother's funeral. Even Charles, when he was in Australia, comes to mind where there were blank shots fired at him and as he was giving a speech.
Oh my gosh, I'd forgotten about that.
Years ago, yes, in your home country.
It wasn't me though. Yeah, I've got an alibi. Yeah.
But I think they sort of brushed it off and then you know, carried on their way. It did seem rather unfair, but I mean, you're always going to get kind of one person like this in the crowd, perhaps.
Eggs aren't cheap, and they're sort of like, you know, baby. I hope they were free range if they were an Extinction Rebellion person. Richard, is it fair to say I don't remember anybody egging the Queen? Would this have happened to the Queen?
Well, I think from what I've seen, the protester was sort of grappled by you know, well-wishers and royalists that had gone out to cheer the King. But my goodness, imagine if they'd tried to do that to the Queen, he would have been, you know, immediately lynched.
To do that to the Queen?
No, I mean we have had incidents in the past with the Queen. In the 80s, yes. There was someone who shot blanks and startled the horses, and just in that case, I think that King Charles really has inherited his mother's calmness under fire, and even though these eggs were flying, he just really just carried on completely calm.
This is where Charles is like me, is like anything big happens, I go into stoic calm mode, but if the pen's not working...
Well, you watch it.
There was a moment when Charles and Camilla actually had kind of paint thrown at their car, if you remember. They were on their way to an evening performance, an evening conference, and they carried on, went to the show that evening, and then were escorted back to the palace in a police van.
On that one.
Yeah, and I think they were pretty. They remained pretty kind of stoic about it. I think they were privately quite shaken up after the event, but
I think there is a sort of element though of, because the Queen was on the throne for so long, obviously she was very elderly, and there was all that built up respect over years, that there was such a sort of aura about her that I don't even know if you dare, even if you were some, you know, sort of anarchist or something. Whereas in Charles's case, he's new on the throne, hasn't even been crowned yet. You know, maybe there are a few people who think, you know, it's kind of worth a try, causing some trouble. But let's be frank, where the King and Queen have been this week, you know, in Yorkshire, there have been huge crowds for them. I mean, they're probably surprised at how big the crowds in Bradford, in Yorkshire, you know, in Leeds were for them. So this was an isolated incident among a whole sea of well-wishers.
Yeah. On to less stoic behaviour. Kate, the story of yours on the front page of the Mail on Sunday last week about Prince Andrew being quote-unquote in tears. I was fascinated. Well,
yeah, I've been really pleasantly surprised about the reaction to this story, because it's more of a kind of psychological story, and I was thinking a bit more of a kind of a sort of featurey read. But we put it on the front, and everyone was said that it's so fascinating. What the story was saying was that Andrew has basically been left in tears. There were two meetings, one in which King Charles had to break it to his brother that he wasn't going to be allowed to wear his uniform. at the Queen's funeral, and also that he was it was the end of the road, that Andrew had been making lots of petitions. He'd been up to Balmoral several times over the summer to talk to the Queen, and hoped still that there was some way back. Let's remember, this is a member of the royal family who gave that excoriating interview on Newsnight, and afterwards thought it had gone pretty well until it went out and was broadcast, and it was of course a complete car crash, a disaster. So his grasp of sort of self-awareness perhaps isn't the best, but still he thought in the summer that there might be a way back. He'd settled the case. There'd been a kind of conclusion of sorts, but this was Charles saying, that's it, there will be no return for you. It's only going to be a kind of private life for you from now on. And I think everything that happened just kind of came crashing down on him, and it has been from people who I know who've seen him, been speaking to him and been with him, saying that it's been very tough.
I understand, Richard, there's a new development this week in this whole murky story that means you might have a bit more warmth towards Andrew, a bit more sympathy. Well,
yeah, there's been a development which does sort of highlight, throws light on the dilemma that Prince Andrew had. Now what this is that the woman who made the accusations against Andrew, which he always vehemently denied, but then he settled with her, Virginia Giuffre as she is now, and paid her a lot of money. What's happened is that there was a court case she was involved in with Alan Dershowitz, the American lawyer, and she had said that he was one of the men she'd been sort of farmed out to by the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and he denied it. He said, "You're a liar. I never had anything to do with you." So she sued him for defamation, and this was going to be the first time that her claims about anyone had been heard in a court. It was going to be in New York in the new year. Now that case has been settled in the sense that she's withdrawn her claims. She said that she may have been mistaken when she identified him. And he's made some graceful comments about her, not holding it against her. He appreciates that she was a victim of Jeffrey Epstein, but that case has collapsed. So, there's already people in America saying Andrew was mad to have settled when he did. But let's remember why he did. He did because this case that was very sordid, all these claims that were going to be heard, would have overshadowed the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, which was such a joyful event in our calendar.
Yes, but cynics would also say perhaps there are other good reasons that he wanted to settle. Maybe he just didn't want any of this aired in public, which could be true. I don't know how much of that I'm allowed to say, but it's...
Well, I think he wanted to fight it, because for ages there were people in the palace saying this needs to go away, and he was saying, well, no, I'm innocent. And there was there was a period, you might remember, when nothing was said. There was a kind of a black hole. There was nothing coming out of Andrew's camp. Palace were getting increasingly agitated that he wasn't even coming out to deny the claims. He was sort of a bit head in the sand, was putting together his defence for the case. And then something changed, I think from palace pressure. Certainly that would have had some bearing on the decision to settle, to pay out, get it all done and make it go away.
Exactly.
Make the problem go away.
So imagine how he feels now when he sees what's happening in America. Alan Dershowitz would have been perfectly willing to go to court and show how her claims, were wrong. But
even if he had gone to court, if Andrew had gone to court and won, can you imagine the kind of what would have come out? And it would have been disastrous for the royal family, not just for him. No. Even if ultimately he had been the victor, you always walk away wounded from those things. It's not, exactly.
Now, he obviously, we have stressed, he's always denied any wrongdoing, Andrew. But do you think, Kate, he could have done more to try and rehabilitate his public image? He could have thrown himself into charity work, for instance, or...
Well, there has been, this sort of criticism that perhaps he might have been doing more rather than mooching around at home and going out for the occasional horse ride. I just wonder what charities would actually want to be associated with him, certainly when he was in the middle of the kind of scandal.
But maybe it doesn't have to be some grandstanding, high-profile moment. Maybe it's just quietly...
That's what I'd like to
I think we're nobly doing something.
Well, I think we'd all like to see Andrew doing something, perhaps, and Who knows? I know him and Sarah Ferguson were putting kind of gift bags together, weren't they, for a charity at one point?
Were they?
But then pictures came out, and you know, you kind of wonder when it's sort of slightly cynical if pictures are emerging of these things. But yeah, I think that would be a great. You know, I'm not a PR person, but I think if he made some kind of efforts to do something for the community, perhaps.
And Jo here is the boss of a very worthy charity herself, so maybe she could help him at least volunteer with something. I noticed she's saying nothing. But
Moving on.
We won't.
Moving on, Richard, if Prince Andrew is kept out of the spotlight, do you think he may well be tempted to go a commercial route if he needs to earn money, write a book, do a podcast? I hear that's quite popular.
Oh,
yeah.
No, please don't, Prince Andrew. I don't know if he's watching this, but I would say that's not the right route to go. You might remember that the Duchess of York, his ex-wife, she posted something about, I think it was to do with the anniversary of the Falklands War, maybe the 40th anniversary, and she made an Insta post about Andrew's very brave role in that. But she ended up taking that down because even that caused controversy because it looked like, you know, Andrew was trying to sort of get some positive publicity or whatever.
I have sympathy for him on that point as well. I mean, you think about Harry and Andrew being the two people who've served kind of frontline roles most recently in the royal family, and neither of them now have any kind of military ties at all. And then he's going to see Princess Anne obviously go out for the Falklands anniversary, thinking it could have been me, it should have been me. But you know, everything has consequences, and the royal family stands for something, certainly. It stands for lots of things, but obviously that's one of the things. You know, there are consequences to your actions.
I think it needs to be charity first and then perhaps maybe something commercial later, but don't go down that route, please.
Prince Andrew, the podcast. Cannot wait. Well, we've heard from our experts. Let's have a quick look at some of your opinions now. And following on from our chat about whether Prince Edward will get the title his father left him, Ewan McEwen says, my hunch is Prince Edward and Countess Sophie will be quietly honoured at the coronation with the titles of Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. What a magnanimous gift that would be. And Suzanne Ball writes about Prince Harry's forthcoming memoirs. She says, as spare, Harry had all of the privilege and few of the responsibilities. He could have moved mountains, saved endangered species. Ooh, that would have been heroic. Anything. Now he stares from the cover of his self-pity and vengeful book with dead eyes and angry jaw. Strong words there. We had so many comments on our discussion as well on the controversy over the crown. This last one says, now I don't quite know how to pronounce this, but I love the way the three journalists speak about Netflix. It's all calm and very British. Well, we do like to maintain standards, even with my Australian accent. So please keep those comments coming in. Leave them below. Email us on palace@mailplus.co.uk or let us know on social media where we are at MailPlus. We'll answer a couple of your questions later on as well. Now, before that, there is lots more to talk about, including Meghan's new podcast and Richard's intriguing tale concerning Harry. But for now, we're going to stick with Netflix and The Crown as the debate over the issue of the truth in the series continues to rumble on. Daily Mail columnist and the Queen's biographer Robert Hardman told us where he thought the series had gone wrong.
We've got the makers of The Crown doing their usual sort of dancing around saying, oh, it's only a drama, but it's all true. Their historical consultant was in the papers at the weekend saying, it's all too true. And what they're very good at doing is sort of picking on a few things that did happen and go, well, look, this happened and that happened and that happened and that's in The Crown. So, of course, it's all true and we're questing for an inner truth. And then you point out, yeah, except that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And they just say that we're being nitpickers. The royal family will ignore it. I mean, they won't watch it, or certainly the older ones won't watch it. And there's not much they can do. I mean, over the years, when you think of all the trials and tribulations, particularly during the 90s, the period this is set in, I mean, frankly, the Crown is pretty second order when it comes to irritants compared to some of the things they've had to put up with over the years. I mean, they'll cope with it. They always do. They get through these things. If they started to complain about particular things in this, then people would just say, well, what about that? They can't give a running commentary. So all they can do is ignore it. And it'll pass. I mean, you know, we're on series 5 now. The only problem is as it gets to the present day, there are more and more people around who are either depicted in it or who remember what happened for real. And I think a lot of people will be hurt by it. I mean, over the years, I've found all sorts of people who've been hurt by this programme. I mean, in one of the early series, there's a the first captain of Britannia is depicted as a sort of World War II shirker, someone who didn't do his duty. The actual real first captain of Britannia, the real person, Connolly Abel Smith, was a hero in the First World War and the Second World War. One of the first men to fly a plane on and off an aircraft carrier, torpedoed in the Second World War, a very great sailor. Not according to the Crown, he's just some sort of, someone who didn't do his job in the Second World War. His family were just sort of, amazed and appalled. And so it goes on. You just get this sort of casual disregard for the little people. And but over time, I think people will come to see that, yes, it's great, it's only a drama. But what I would say to all those watching is, don't believe it. Take it with a pinch of salt. And when you see these high-minded, lofty proclamations by the makers that it's all based on some lofty, brilliant inner truth and hours and days of meticulous research, no, it isn't.
Robert Hardman there. We hope to have another interview with Robert very soon about his updated new book. But let's turn back to my panel now. And Kate, Robert doesn't think the palace will ever comment about the Crown. What say you?
I don't think they will on the record, no. I think they're trying to rise above it. But certainly there are lots of people within the palace and friends of the royal family who will speak out on behalf of the king, or certainly feeling his horror at the whole thing and talking about it. So we've had John Major, former Prime Minister, speaking in our pages. We've had Tony Blair has come out, another former PM who feels that they've been maligned by the Netflix writers. So I think there are people, there's enough anger within the palace that, it is known that they're not amused by it. But officially, no, they're not going to come out and say anything. I would be very, very surprised.
Richard, a fascinating story popped up in your column this week about Prince Harry.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us more.
Yeah, this is Harry's old friend, the celebrated primatologist Dame Jane Goodall. She's the world expert on chimpanzees and
primatologist. There's
yes,
a word.
I had to learn that word.
Fancy word for monkey lady.
Expert on monkey lady. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you might remember that Harry interviewed her for Meghan's edition of Vogue that she edited. Yeah.
This is the one where he said he was only going to have 2 children and anything more was...
it caused real controversy.
Well, seeing as William and his 3.
So Dame Jane's great. So she's because she's at the age where, she can say what she likes. And anyway, what she said was that Harry had told her that he wanted to raise his children in Africa. He talked about how he wanted Archie to run barefoot with the African children and this sort of thing. But of course, it never happened. They moved to North America instead, and now they're in California. And I would just love to hear that conversation with Meghan where he was talking about how he'd like to raise the kids in Africa. And I suspect she might have said, you know what, I prefer California.
But that was closer to reality than people think, because there were people in the palace trying to, when things were going wrong with Meghan and Harry, they were trying to put in kind of place, okay, what's an alternative going to look like? What can we help make work? And that was one of the solutions they were saying.
It could have been in a Commonwealth country.
They could have had that. I think they would have had... They could have had 5 years away in Africa, come back and forth. They could have had a really nice gig.
Yeah, but would they have been able to sign those big deals with Netflix and Spotify?
No, funnily enough, no.
There would have been an interesting television show in that as well. There would have been.
Oh, there could have been.
Yeah.
But let's be frank, when they visited South Africa on their tour, it wasn't wildly happy. They did a documentary and they didn't seem very keen to talk about Africa. Instead, Meghan talked about, no one asked about me. Then she's since complained about the accommodation, how Archie was almost killed in a fire. So I'm not sure Africa holds particularly happy memories for Meghan.
Can I ask, was that Jane Goodall's or Harry's wording, Archie running barefoot with the African children?
She was quoting.
She said that.
She was quoting Harry.
I just feel, I'm slightly uncomfortable with that sort of just.
Well, yeah,
casting them all as barefoot natives.
Yeah. I've got a friend a colleague from an African background, and she didn't like the sort of suggestion that all children in Africa are running around barefoot.
Yeah, awful. Anyway, I just want to clarify that because I know we'll get tweets about that. But Kate, there is this tension, isn't there, between Harry wanting to escape the limelight and yet moving to Hollywood.
Well, that was the thing, and initially I think everybody thought, fair enough, Harry. Goldfish bowl of a childhood existence. go away. You know, if he was going to be a sheep farmer in New Zealand, I think we'd all say, fair enough. I mean, who can blame him? And he wanted to have this. And there
Not
was
much money in sheep shearing, I can tell you that.
Yeah, and I think initially there was a lot of sympathy in saying that they wanted to have, and a lot of people sort of cheered them on their way and went, well, good luck to you. But I think now making a kind of a media brand that seems quite determined to constantly talk about the royal family, constantly, you know, criticise, that's where we're seeing sort of slight change, and people are thinking, hang on a minute, this doesn't feel like you're away from the limelight.
Well, speaking of Brand Sussex, what did you learn this week, Richard, in your avid listening of the Duchess of Sussex's podcast?
Yeah, this is my Tuesday special. I sit down and listen
sets the alarm for 5 a.m.
Meghan's podcast.
Yeah.
The whole premise of her series for Archewell is Archetypes, where it's meant to be words and looking how their impact on women and this sort of thing. But by funny coincidence, every week seems to be about criticisms that have been made in the past of Meghan. So this week it was all about difficult women and how women often get branded as difficult when in fact that could be a positive term or whatever.
Can't relate, can you, Kate?
No.
Then she talked about the B word, as she kept describing it, which is bitch. I don't know if we're allowed to say that on our programme, but
I think you just did.
either way.
You're not an American rapper, Richard, but you carry on.
What made me laugh slightly is that Meghan said she hates the word so much she'll never even use it. But then it reminded me of her old blog she used to do, the TIG, where she wrote this post about how she loves swearing. Said she found it really cathartic to every now and then have a good swear, but maybe that was a word she didn't use.
Yeah, maybe she went right back to the big leagues. What do you think, Kate?
How do you respond to that? Well, of course, the immediate thing I thought about that podcast was, you know, all the criticism that she's had at the palace and the accusations of bullying, and which she's always denied. And maybe this is almost like her kind of talking about it and saying, wow, people said I was difficult, but actually maybe it was just because I was really focused and, you know, it was this sort of sexism and that sort of thing. Having said that, 2 of the complainants were said to be women, so it's difficult.
Let's turn to some of your questions now. The first one is from Amy Lynn, who asks, I could be wrong, but didn't Diana dismiss her royal protection officers herself? Hasn't Ken Wharf, her former security head of, said that he advised her not to and she did it anyway? Why is it being repeated that Diana's protection was taken away when she lost her HRH? Kate, what can you tell us?
I think this is a really good question. And I think the answer is, why is it being repeated, is these things get lost in the mists of time, as we know.
We were discussing it in
stories are told
last week.
and retold, and, you know, facts go missing and facts are inserted, you know, various truths. But yeah, there was Diana's decision that she didn't want to have that security, and I think at that point there was huge paranoia, not in least created by Martin Bashir, and he was winding up this kind of narrative that everyone was out to get her, and there was a paranoia that everything she did might go back to the palace, and the Queen had said, yeah, have police round the clock, police security, and the decision was taken by Diana that she would have Fayed's team, and you know, we all know what happened, but the answer is, why do people keep repeating this or that about what happened to Diana, is that it's such, you know, it's kind of moved into that kind of legend status. Then you've got things like The Crown, which is confusing the issue, and the internet, and people, you know, coming up with various conspiracy theories, and I think that, and that's why, and I think it's dangerous, really, that people forget or people misremember willfully what happened. The truth is that Diana decided that she didn't want the police security. She declined it. She was offered it, and the Queen made that clear. But perhaps because she was feeling paranoid that everything she did was going back, and she couldn't really have a private life if she's surrounded by, you know, state police security, that she went her own way, and the consequences were disastrous. And Ken Wharf has spoken about this. He's been on this programme talking about it, and has said that he advised her not to do that, sadly, but she didn't take the advice.
So sad. Now, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Sarah. Sarah Boulier writes, if Prince Harry remains number 5 in the succession, this would mean that Archie Mountbatten Windsor as number 6 would require the King's approval to marry. Do you agree? And by the way, Sarah says, I love the show and I could listen to Rebecca English for hours. I mean, couldn't we all? But I have to say, this is some detail that I have not spent quality time thinking about. Richard, please give us an answer.
I love this type of thing. It's great to get into this detail. I think
It's
technically,
really getting in the weeds.
Technically,
Yeah.
it is true that he would have to ask permission from the monarch. Archie would, but remember that by that point, Prince George might be married himself. He might have a child. Who knows? But if he hasn't, then yes, Archie would. But it is a sort of tradition. I can't really imagine King Charles saying, you know what, I don't like the sound of that, girlfriend. Sorry, you can't.
Okay, so do we know which number in the succession means you drop out and you can marry whoever on earth you like, go nuts?
From what I understand, it's after number 6. Yeah,
Oh,
first
how
6.
interesting. So, yes, so the minute George has a child, the whole succession thing is complete. I think a lot of Americans don't understand the succession thing. It is quite complicated.
By the time George has a child, presumably then William might be on the throne.
Yeah.
So then everyone shifts up, so yeah.
So anyway, the conclusion is probably she'd have to be a truly ghastly girlfriend for King Charles to say no way.
Okay, there you go. You've heard it here first, Sarah. Now you've got all the info you need. But that is all we have time to tell you about on Palace Confidential today. Huge thanks to Kate Mansey, Richard Eden, Robert Hardman, and of course to you for watching. Keep those comments and questions coming. We love them and we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.